The meta has shaken up quite a bit since the last time we did a meta-analysis, which was exactly 1 week ago. Now, for set 11, we're going to try to do some more mid-patch analyses because there's a lot of things that change over the course of a week alone. A lot of new comps, a lot of new lines, a lot of new things that people have already realized that are already taking over the meta. So in today's video, we're going to go over what those things are and how to actually play around them and how to utilize them to our advantage to try and garner LP for ourselves. And today, the first one we're going to talk about is Ghostly Flex. Ghostly Flex has been sort of talking the town over the past couple of days. If you don't know what it is, basically you just play vertical Ghostly, and people have realized that Ghostly is actually surprisingly very strong. It's very flexible in the way that you can play around it. You can play around forecast, you can play reroll, and it's great. It's just a bunch of, it's just like mini contagions around the board, but it basically melts through everything like butter. It's especially really great against Faded as well. It's actually a huge counter towards Faded because a lot of the time when you're playing Faded, you are binding the Thresh with something else, ideally set. But because that's so much armor and armor that's going around your team, these contagions, these specters that go around throughout the Ghostly vertical, do yourself a huge favor in melting a lot of units. So it's actually a really great Faded counter, which was sort of being prevalent as well over the course of the past week. But let's talk about how to play it. Obviously, this is the core itself. Shen, Alawi, Aatrox, Kayn, Morgana. Not much else needs to be said. Caitlyn is also in here as well, who is also a Ghostly unit. But typically, if you are trying to play Flex and trying to play around forecast in particular, you actually drop the Caitlyn and you usually have a spat on somebody, as long as it's a frontliner. You don't want to put it on any of your carries. That is a really bad idea. It's just not a lot of damage, not a lot of stats you can garner out of it. It's probably worse than anything like IE, GS, Rabadons, whatever you name it. You have better items to put on your carries. The first one we'll talk about in terms of actual lines is the Senna Shen line. This is something that was really prevalent over the past couple of days. It's still a very top tier comp, but it does require some things to go right. Specifically the what's it called? The tattoo. Excuse me. But tattoo protection is easily the best. If you see protection, I think you can already start thinking about playing around Senna. But also toxin as well is super nice. These are, I think, if either of these are my Ink Shadow item, and you should check these as soon as you get into game, consider playing into the line here. I think people are just kind of hard forcing this no matter what their spot is, and I don't think that's the way to go. Just like with any line in TFT, it may be overpowered, but if you hard force any line, you will be hard punished like 99% of the time. Sometimes you get lucky, but most of the time that's not how it rolls. Level 6 reroll comp, very simple. You just reroll on 6 until you hit the Shen 3 Center 3 and then push levels, and then you try to cap out with things like the Morgana and the Kayn. Try to hit 6 Ghostly. Shiv, Last Whisper are crucial in this comp. Obviously, things like Spark and Evanshot are fine, but Shiv and Last Whisper are definitely better in general, just because Last Whisper can spread a little better on Caitlyn. Morgana is really good at spreading the Shivs, like fucking debuff everywhere on the board, you know? So it's pretty solid. You do want both because basically the Ghostlies apply, or rather, it's complicated. The TLDR is Ghostly does magic damage, and because it does magic, you want to push Shiv. If your opponent has a D-Claw, your Ghostly is going to do less damage. That's like the general gist. You don't have to understand the post and pre-mitigation damage, how that works. It's a little too complicated to be talking about it, and low-key, I don't remember exactly what it is. It's a little annoying. Just remember you need both Sunder and Shred. The Sunder is specifically for Caitlyn. Obviously, if you're playing around AP carry, this wouldn't be the case. Just to go over some other carries that you can play around as well, in case you decide to play standard instead. Maybe you're contested for Senna's, that's totally fine. But if you do find that Ghostly spat, typically something like an Ornn is super nice to throw it on. It just spreads it nicely. It doesn't have the best stats, but hey, it's good enough. You just want it on front line so it can help spread stacks. That's the main idea. Things like Ashe, things like Kai'Sa. I think Kai'Sa is the most popular. Kai'Sa is probably the one. You actually don't need Trick Shot. I've seen Soju play this without. He plays like 6 Ghostly Flex without Trick Shot, and then he teched in Trick Shot at like 9. It was like some really strange board, but surprisingly, even without Trick Shot, it was still fairly solid. You can play around Sinja as well. I think Lilia and Silas are very uncommon, but you can use Silas as a secondary carry, which is totally fine. And Lilia, it's a little hard to fit in, but you play something with like an Annie, and then suddenly it's looking decent enough, and it's fine. And basically, Ghostly spreads around the board. Lilia hits everything on the board. You don't have a lot of single target focus, which kind of sucks. Which we're seeing nowadays a little more important now in terms of board strength, but the Kaisa is definitely the best winner, and Sidra I think is a close second. But that basically does it. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, Tech Summers, who is a very, very fantastic player from the Latin American region, posted this whole Twitter guide. You want to go check it out, I will link his Twitter down below, specifically to this post if you want to go check it out. But moving on, next is Behemoth Cane. Behemoth Cane, this is a dish soap special, well, technically a water park tactics special, but Dish Soap played this on stream the other day. We covered it actually in the last video if you want to go check it out. So I won't talk too much about it, but it's the new Yone variation. It's just 4 Behemoth instead of playing 4 Umbral. The idea being is that, like, it's very cheap and cost effective because on your 7 board is just this and then Malphite on 8. It's a very, very cheap board to hit. It's very cheap to stabilize with, and basically because of how cheap it is, it's a lot easier to hit Yone 3. It's a little harder to hit like the Silas, the Alune 3, and the Kane 2 and the Ornn 2 on top of everything else. It's a lot to be asking for in the sort of quote-unquote standard line beforehand. Nowadays, you're seeing the 4 Behemoth line being played significantly more, and again, it's just Malphite on 8. Things like Gargantuan Resolve, things like Freaky Friday, these are really, really great augments to this comp. This comp, by the way, is very, very augment dependent. I think a lot of players have been trying to play this line, and then they've been playing it with like econ augments, things like what is it, the augment, the gold augment, I forgot what it's called, you can remind me in the comments, but the gold augment that gives you like the double duplicator, that is fucking shit. Like it's trash. Like, don't fucking click that shit. You can't use that. You need triple combat, things like Harm Assist 3, things like I don't know if Baboom is actually good in this comp. It might be okay. Freaky Friday's amazing just because both Yone and Kane can utilize the Triforce. It's one of the best comps in this line. Things like Jewel Lotus 3, you get the idea. Combat is the name of the game. You want combat augments, and you want to be tempoing into this usually. You don't really want to hard force it. You want to just tempo into the line and then play into it on 7. And then sometimes you can even level to 8 if you think your spot's looking really precarious, and then you can just play for like a top 4 instead. If you're just bleeding out too fast and you're hitting like negative Yones, or maybe you're contested, who knows. But really solid line. And again, if you want to watch Dish Soul play it, we covered it in a VOD review yesterday. And actually, funny enough, he uploaded it onto his YouTube. I didn't know he was gonna make it a tuber, but and then somebody commented like, "Oh, Kai is such a savage for fucking, you know, posting the VOD before Dish Soap did." I was like, dude, I didn't fucking know. He didn't tell me. All right, I even linked his Twitch in the description, man. Like, I'm doing my job. I'm doing my due diligence. All right, but anyways, moving on here. This is actually a load chest, or rather, a player's profile, and this is actually Mogu Yummy, who, if you don't know who this is, by their more popular name, it is Pokygum, who is a very, very, very strong player in the North American region. Shout out to him, by the way, because he's also part of our study group. So super, super nice guy. Really just willing to share information, whatever he finds. He's very, very good player. Very cool guy. But basically, I'm showing you his match history for a reason. And why we're talking about Pokygum is because there's a particularly interesting portion of his match history. This isn't back-to-back, so this is Photoshopped so that you can see that, like, all the... Like, I wasn't going to go through each one of his games and scroll through, like... You get the idea! Please! Time saver. Thank you. You're welcome. Vertical Dryad is surprisingly very prevalent in his match history. He actually really likes it. He doesn't think it's amazing by any means, but he thinks it's actually a lot more solid and a lot more underplayed than he thinks it should be. He actually thinks it's a very, very solid line. It's just very simple. It's just Gnar 3, and then you play around whatever else you hit. Typically, it looks like he's hitting like Rek'Sai 3 or Kindred 3, or sometimes even Ult 3, and that's totally okay. This augment, I believe it's called Mulched. M-U-L-C-H-E-D, or mulched. I don't know what it means. So how am I supposed to know what it's called? But basically, this augment is fucking nutty. You just take this, you can just hard force like Vertical Dryads, and it seems to be like perfectly acceptable. Obviously, Gnar is the main carry, and crazy enough, I did look into the stats of this as well. Gnar 3 without Ascend is a 4.41. It's fine, but it's kind of weird because I think you need like a good spot for it. Like, you can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna load into every game Vertical Dryad because no one's playing it. Because 4 Dryad with Gnar 3 without Ascend 3 is averaging like a 5. So you do need to be careful because 6 Dryad looks really solid, right? But you need the spat. So you need to have like a good line, a good opener, something that screams to you like, hey, this is an option, consider playing it. It's just very simply, again, Vertical Dryad, Gnar 3 is the main carry, but things like the Rek'Sai 3 or Kindred 3 are just nice add-ons. They're not necessarily bad by any means, but you might notice that we actually don't have Reaper activated. Just 2 Reaper is just kind of fake news. Things like the Morello holder for the Kindred, Titans BT as always, very similar to the, the Sign and Gnar line from previous patches. Not previous patches, sorry. previous fucking meta-analyses. No one's playing Senanar anymore. But this Kindred Nar line is surprisingly a lot more stronger than expected. But again, I wouldn't play this like... I wouldn't angle it very often. It'd be like very niche case scenarios. But I thought it was worth talking about it because it was surprisingly like pretty good in the match history. And if Pocky can pilot it to, you know, these like top 1s, top 2 spots, by all means, you should definitely consider this line if you have an opener for it. But anyways, just wanted to share this one as well. Finally, or not finally, sorry, there's 2 more left. Find Vintage. Find Vintage is a comp that has been sort of spiking throughout the community, and it's gonna get turbo gutted. I'm calling it right now. I think everyone is painfully aware that Find Vintage is going to get gutted in one way or another. Not really sure how. I haven't looked at the PvE notes just yet because those are subject to change. But my theory is either they make Find Vintage a gold augment or they lower ZZ Rot scalings throughout the game. Something like that. But if you don't know what's going on, basically it's simple. You take Find Vintage on 2-1. You just don't slam a single goddamn item. Well, you make items and you just leave them on your bench. And then you wait for them to turn to support items and you pick up every ZZ Rot you see. Plus, things that can buff them. So things like Aegis, things like Randuins. These support items actually work on ZZ Rot. So you actually have ways in order to fortify the ZZ Rots to the point where they actually become like these unkillable little demons. And it's a fucking nightmare to play into. You see people with Find Vintage on 2-1 and high elo, you kind of go, oh, I'm not playing for first. It's especially tough if you see like Find Vintage and then somebody else is like a fortune opener and you're like, fuck, like, oh god, like it's bad. But that's how strong the comp is. Heavenly, in case you haven't already caught on, is just to help buff the ZZ Rots. It's a fucking nutty line. It's super fun to play. This is, by the way, I know it's getting gutted. I know it's gonna get gutted. But like, please, just make the line just slightly worse. Because this line, it's so fun. This is one of those comps in TFT that when you play it, you're like, oh, like TFT is so fun. Like TFT is actually fun as shit. Like when you get to play stuff like this, because it's so weird but so unique, and the fact that it's an S tier line, it just makes it all that much better. But please play it. Like just auto click find Vintage and just have a good time. Like it's so fun. I did want to mention this as well. Find Vintage actually has a second variation that I don't think enough players really consider. It's technically worse compared to who you talk to or ask, but it's the 7 Story Weaver version, or basically vertical Story Weaver, but you play around the ZZ Rots and etc. The reason why this actually works at all is because guess what? Support items don't only work on your units and the ZZ Rots, they also work on your Kale. So Kale can actually get turbo buffed by these augments as well. So things like Aegis in particular is really nice because now you kind of have 2 options, because not only can you buff the ZZ Rots, you can also buff the Kale. As you can see in the Heavenly version, I think a lot more people prefer Randuins over anything else. I personally just like Aegis a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I'm just like a little Aegis fanboy. That's a pun, by the way. But by the way, this is representing ZZ Rots in case you can't figure it out. But really solid and fun line, and Kale it's just so much easier to play Story Weaver. This is a lot more brain dead. It's a little harder to like play the Heavenly line because sometimes you lose a little too much HP, and then it gets a little bit dicey because you're not really sure like what's going on. Sometimes you miss on the ZZ Rots, sometimes, you know, XYZ happens, so it can get a little dicey. I will mention one thing though, make sure that you have 1 source of anti-heal and 1 source of shred. Typically that can look like in the form of things like Morello, things like the gem, oh sorry, not the gem is separate, but the Morello's specifically important. If you're playing the Story Weaver version, actually red buff is better because Aurelia loves red buff, and any shitter can hold it until you hit the Aurelia, so you're perfectly chilling. But also keep in mind, you might also notice the gem as well. The gem is just because that's like your insurance policy. Basically you're saying, hey, as long as I have at least 1 gem, my board will clear if the fight goes past 15 seconds, which most of the time, because you have so much goddamn HP on the board, like, your opponent is fighting the Great Wall of China. This is like Attack on Titan style. You're the fucking Titan, and everybody's sitting there like Eren Yeager looking up at that shit, and they're going like, holy fuck, right? And they're shitting themselves. This line's very fun. You should try it. Also, I never watched Attack on Titan, so yeah. If my analogy is wrong, sorry. But anyways, moving on here, finally, Fortune Tech. This is not actually a board, this is just showing you the Fortune units. But there is sort of this new way of approaching Fortune that has sort of came up a little bit. It's actually inspired by the way that Heartsteel was played during set 10, which if you don't know, basically starting stage 4, if you had high enough HP, you just pivoted into Heartsteel, and then you would just start losing from there because you couldn't guarantee your streak, and then you would just lose until like 40 HP, get a good cash out, switch back out, pivot out, and then you're chilling on 9 with like a really insane board and a really insane cap. Basically, you're looking for a little bit of that extra juice to push your board to its limits and try to go for first. There are ways of playing this and ways that you don't. Clement has a very interesting thread on Twitter, which I will link in the description as well, basically talking about like why it works, how to play around it. But I won't go too far in depth with it. He goes significantly more in depth than I would, just because I'm also still very new to this, but I did want to bring it up to your radars. So like, for example, just the very standard thing is, hey, if you end up, you know, win streaking to stage 4 and you find some fortune units, like specifically 3 or maybe even 5 if you're lucky, consider just teching into it. Especially if you don't think you're going to preserve your streak, just tech into fortune for stage 4, lose streak for a bit, and then get your cash out. Bada bing, bada boom, you're chilling, fast 9, and you have an incredible board to play around with a lot more juice, a lot more resources to cap around. Again, it's a very creative way to play fortune, but just keep it in mind. I am, by the way, for those of you who don't know, I am participating / creating a new project. Specifically, it has to do with fortune. So if you've been on stream recently, you would know what I'm talking about. But we'll keep that for tomorrow, because tomorrow's video is when we announce it. But that's gonna basically do it for today's video. Hope you guys learned something. I don't know how long these mid-patch analyses are gonna be in general, but I hope this wasn't too long. But anyways, take care, guys, and happy climbing.